Hey, good afternoon. My name is Dean Walker. I'm the Executive Director for the Geneva Institute of Christian Thought. And I'm very pleased to have a couple of candidates here for the Tennessee 1st Congressional District to talk about issues that are very relevant to the Christian community. We also have Stephen Warhurst with us to give an introduction in just a second. But very excited about what we have today. And Josh, why don't you get us started with
Yeah. So my name is Josh Gapp. I'm a physician in Johnson City. I got a practice in Johnson City and Knoxville, and back and forth between them all the time. Importantly, I'm a Christian, a father, a husband. I've got 4 children, 20, 18, 12, and 10-year-old. And the reason I'm running, and I think it's important to have a why, because there's so much difficulty in what we've been doing, and you can attest to that, but it's important to have a why. And my why is that political correctness has become a cancer and it's tearing our society. It's the left is using political correctness as a tool to shut down debate and shut down thought, to get rid of free speech, and to try to rewrite our history and let it literally erase and rewrite our history. And I'm terribly concerned that if we don't stand up and do something about it, my children aren't going to have the same opportunities that my wife and I have enjoyed. And I'm really concerned that our grandchildren might not even have a country left. So that's why I'm running. And that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing it. So.
Good. Jay?
My name's Jay Adkins, and I was born in Johnson City. I currently live in Carter County up in Stony Creek. And I've been telling people I'm 3 things. I'm a foster dad, I'm a veteran, and I'm an engineer. And I currently work as a process engineer in Churchill for a company called Hutchinson Sealing Systems. And over the past 4 years, really, we've been let down by the GOP. In 2016, we were promised that if we got the House, we got the Senate, got the White House, we defunded Planned Parenthood, we repeal and replace Obamacare. And 4 years later, we're looking at things. Obamacare is still a law, and Planned Parenthood still gets our taxpayer dollars. So, when I found out that Phil Rowe was retiring, with a little encouragement from my wife, I started praying about it. Talked with my pastor, talked with the elders of my church, and friends, and family, and after talking with them and a lot of prayer, I feel like that God's called me to do this, called me to run, because we need people who are willing to serve, and service over self is my motto, and that's what I really want to do. I want to serve the Lord, and through that, serve this district.
Good.
I'm Stephen Warhurst, and I'm an associate pastor here at the church, Westminster Presbyterian Church, and also a board member on the Geneva Institute of Christian Thought. There's the sign in the back. And we love to talk about this stuff. And so I'm here just to help with the conversation, talk about how the scriptures apply to politics, all of life, and that's really sort of what the Geneva Institute is about. How does the scripture apply to everything? And so we're willing to talk about anything: economics, politics, history, literature, engineering, medicine, all that. So hopefully we can get into some of that in our discussion. I'm here just to help facilitate the conversation.
Okay, very good. Well, let's dive in. Here's the first question. Government, secular education, has a virtual monopoly on our education system. The advantages provided by government funding has given it power to indoctrinate children from the Christian community in worldviews that are antithetical to Christianity. What can we do, both at the K-12 level and the college level, to free up education resources in order to educate our children firmly in a Christian worldview? Josh, you want to get started?
Yeah. So I think this is a fundamental problem that you have anytime the government gets involved in anything. And the government gets involved with dollars. It starts throwing money at things, and at first the money it's like a drug dealer. At first the money's free, and then it starts coming with strings, and then the strings get bigger, and then the strings get bigger, and then before you know it, the government's telling you what you can do and how you can do it. And that, it's happened in medicine, it's happened in, I'd say everything the government touches it happens, but it's definitely happened in education. We keep throwing more and more money into education with more and more strings attached, and that turns education into a political debate instead of what it should be, which is learning and free exchange of ideas and actual history and facts. And so, to the extent that we can, and you get to a point now where a lot of it's baked into the cake, and peeling back those layers per se, get more and more difficult the more that the government gets its tentacles into there.
Sure.
But that's where we need to go. We need to start figuring out how to pull that back and how to give that choice back to the end consumer, the end user, which in this case is the parents and the children. And the government's involved in different ways at different levels. The good thing about elementary and high school is that at least it's a little bit more local than the government, but it's still a government-run institution at that point. And with some federal money, as well. But by the time you get into the university systems, the federal government really just corrupted the sanctity of that institution, of those institutions. And so dismantling that or pulling that back, that's where I think we need to focus to do that.
Wholeheartedly agree. So the question becomes how, what to do at this point. Jay?
Well, first of all, I think we have to recognize the job that Josh and I are applying for. And we're going to the House of Representatives, the U.S. House of Representatives. And the federal government doesn't have the authority to deal with our education system. It's not their job. It's not what we should be doing. We shouldn't have a federal Department of Education. It's not the federal government's job to tell you how to educate your children. So I believe that we need to make sure that the local governments are in charge, and we need to give. It comes down ultimately to the parents, and vouchers and school choice are really unpopular around here right now, and I think it's because of the way the TEA has been working. But the reality is that at the state level, at the local level, your tax dollars are paying to educate your children, so you should have the choice of how your child is educated. And then if that means that you want your child to be homeschooled, if that means that you want your child to go to a private Christian school, it's your money, and it should be allocated to your child without strings attached, without that regulation.
So you're basically advocating for a voucher system.
Yeah, I believe that the market is, I believe that free market works, and there are very few questions to which the answer is government. And so with vouchers, if you want to send your kid to a government school, then your money goes to that. If you want to send them to a private school, that's good. And that's going to cause the government schools, it should cause the government schools to have to compete and have to increase the level of education that your students get.
Sure. Would you picture the money actually funneling through the federal government into the voucher or state?
Well, there shouldn't be federal money involved.
So you would cut federal matching funds completely.
Right.
And then where are the funds coming from?
They're coming from the state, from the state level and from the local level.
Okay. But with choice with parents as how out. Any restrictions on religious instruction?
Not on religious instruction. This was a Supreme Court case that came up recently, where and forgive me, it was a state out west, but where they had a scholarship system where the students could take this scholarship money to a private institution, and then it came up about, well, what if that private institution is religious? And the Supreme Court said, no, you've already said you can take that money to a private institution. It doesn't matter what they teach. And so I do believe, be it homeschooling, be it public schooling, private schooling, I believe we have to have some standards of education, because I want our children to learn. But I'm talking about, the 3 R's. I'm talking about actual, objective learning. not, rewritten history. So,
What do you think, Stephen? Does that work?
Since I'm not running for office, I can say either.
Yes, you can.
So, I'm for complete separation of schools and state. I think we should have complete separation of school and state. The parents are the ones who have the authority. God has put children in the homes of parents, and the state has no jurisdiction. Parents are supposed to teach their children any way they want, doing it any way, going in the direction they want, religious background, learning, things like that. The Bible, if they want the center of their curriculum to be the Bible, then that should be the center of their curriculum for their children. And they should have that complete liberty. So I would advocate state gets out of it. I think they do a lousy job. I think they're incredibly expensive. We homeschool 8 kids, and I'm assure you, I'm not sure what the local high school costs per student. I know it's around $15,000.
It may be more. I know your number from, Wade County in North Carolina.
Per
was
student.
closer to 20, about 10 years ago.
That's per student.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a homeschooling dad. If I got $15,000 a year, we're studying European history in Europe.
Exactly.
Right.
If I got that kind of money, we're studying Egypt by the pyramids, that kind of stuff. So I think all the vast waste of resources in education needs to just be stopped. Get rid of government out of it completely. Let people educate their kids. Now, what's going to be the objection? What about the kids whose parents don't care? Well, there's going to be schools that will rise up and say, let's take care of these kids. Private schools will say, hey, these parents don't care about these kids. Let's see if we can get them to come here. There'll be scholarships, there'll be funds. And so I think it can be done. I think people will do it. We're a school too. We work at Geneva Institute, and we're working hard to give free education away.
We are.
Literally, we got scholarships, and we say, come, we'll pay for it. And we want to help kids who want to learn and grow. I think that would happen all over the country if the government just I know I'm not running for office.
So that's where funding would come from. You think it would come from private funding?
Yeah.
Let us educate your kids.
Parents, institutions. I think Eastman would probably start a school to help get good people in there. They'd have a school that would be people who wanted to go to Eastman. Businesses would give to schools that would help get them good employees. I think it should just be free, set completely free from the state.
What do you guys think?
Well, I am running for office, but I'm honest, and perhaps because of the things I've seen in politics and the little bit of experience that I've had with it, and just maybe I have a little more cynical worldview, is that I don't trust. I don't trust that would happen. It's just my personal. Like I said, maybe I'm a little bit of a cynic. But I know parents, I've seen parents, parents that are, that their children were put into my care as a foster parent, that ultimately, because of the culture that they grew up in, and this is with public schooling, they have no concept, they don't think about the future. And that's, we can get into the whole issue about poverty and those kind of addiction, all those kind of decisions. But when they don't have a thought of the future for themselves, they don't have a thought of the future for their children. And I don't know that they would be even motivated to say, go to a free school. I think they really would do a disservice to their children like they've done already to whatever degree that those children have had to go into the custody of the state. So, like I said, maybe I'm just a little bit of a cynic. I think we need some sort of direct access without requiring private funding.
So, I'm running for office too. So gotta, tread these, needle this thread or thread this needle appropriately here. So ideologically, I'm very similar to where you're at. I think, my preference would be not to need a government at all. I think that, there's very little things that a government needs to do or should do. And in a perfect world, that works perfectly. In a world full of non-sinners, that works perfectly. unfortunately, there is evil in the world, and I don't think you have to look too far to find it, but there is evil in the world. And if there weren't evil in the world, all sorts of things would work really great. We wouldn't need people like me and Jay doing what we're doing. And so we have to balance these firm, great ideals with the reality of the world that we're seeing. And I can speak from a little bit of personal experience, like Jay, you're fostering, which is very admirable, by the way. My wife and I, we've actually built a preschool. And we've got 170 kids approximately, we've got 11 classrooms. But so I am familiar with what it takes to make a safe, caring environment in which children can learn, and it's completely private. It's not state funded. I think we take some, we take some assistance money from people from the state, but that's not what our school is built on. It's a private school, and so I also know what it's like to compete in that marketplace to get to convince the parents that this is the right place for the children to be. And it's a real honor when you send the kids there. And there's no greater trust than the trust that a parent places in the caregiver for their children, which we feel. And so these issues, ideologically, I know where you're at, and I completely appreciate where you're at. But I do think that there's a benefit to society to have an educated population. It helps stamp out evil if you have an educated population, and it helps raise the tide of the society as a whole. So I do think that there's a public good to ensuring that education is available. And the difference here, so this is a key difference. For the most part, I think the government needs to stay out of most things, and it's personal choice, and it's up to you to live your life. In this particular instance, you're talking about children who you can make a sound argument don't have the tools yet to make these choices for themselves, or the resources to make these choices for themselves. And so I think there is a little bit of onus on society to make sure that those basic tools are given at the beginning, so that when you're an adult, you're capable of making these decisions. And so I do think that there is a role for education as a public good. But I'm very cautious about making sure that the government stays as much out of it as we can. And the devil's in the details there. How do we go about doing that? We could probably have 10 days worth of discussion on that.
Sure. And I think, one of the problems is that if you start from the perspective of it is the parents' ultimate responsibility to educate the children, and then we recognize that there's evil in the world, so there are some issues. There will always be failures within that system. The question is, then what do you do to correct those failures? And unfortunately, what we have today is the government stepping in to attempt to fix those problems, not doing a good job, and hampering the parents' ability to do it. So that has been the result of the government trying to step in.
It hampers the ability of the parents who are trying to help, who are active in their child's life and their education. It hurts them while they're trying to, I think that the intention, of course we know where good intentions lead, but the intention of some of these is to aim towards, like I said, educating all of our children, and it shouldn't hamper those parents who are taking an active interest. And another thing, and maybe this is a little bit of what Josh was trying to say, is because the United States is such a diverse country, this plan, your ideas are it's a lot easier to apply these kind of principles when you have a homogeneous society. And it's the reason that the liberals always point to Scandinavia when they talk about socialism, because it's a homogeneous society that everybody shares the same values, and it has a culture that, if my neighbor is lazy and my neighbor isn't doing something, the culture shames them into actually acting. And we don't have that here because it's so heterogeneous, and then some people share different values. So I think applying that plan, if we're in the book of Acts, is easy. But in the United States, it makes it a little more difficult because we do have people who don't share the same values we do.
And I'll add to that we're having this discussion here. And it's an important discussion. I think it's clear that there is a public good to education, and that it's something that we should strive to make sure that people have access to, or children have access to. At the same time, I don't think there's an issue in the United States now of not having access to public education. I think that right now, the bigger evil per se, I shouldn't say evil, but the bigger bad in this case is that there's too much government at the moment. It's not the opposite, and it's not that there's not enough. It's that there's too much. And and I think Jay probably agrees with this too. But we should be looking at how to scale it back at this point, not make it more intrusive.
Well, I'll try to answer some of the objections. One is, I think, because it's a heterogeneous society, the privatization would make it even more worse, because the Muslims can send their kids to the Muslim school, Hindus can send their kids to the Hindu school, Christians to the Christian school, atheists to the atheist school. And so it would actually be beneficial to all those people. They get charged. Right now, all the kids go to the atheist school, because essentially the public school is, by practice and by law, or it's against. You can't preach God. You can't preach the faith. You can't preach God's law. You can't preach the Bible.
You can't even pledge the allegiance anymore.
Right. So I think a major problem with the country is government control education, that they are corrupting our children. And the reason they go off and become socialists is because they learn their lessons. They learned what the schools were teaching them, and they became good socialists. The reason that they're supporting perverse ideas and practicing them, that's because that's what they were taught was good and right. So I'm going to argue that all education is religious ultimately, has religious assumptions, and there's anti-Christian assumptions. Schools are atheistic at best, probably Christian in a lot of places. I had professors who were definitely anti-Christian who came after me because of what I did. And so I think that is actually a benefit of privatization for all those people who didn't. Also, public education, state-controlled education is relatively new historically. We had our first public school in this county in the early 1900s. So for hundreds of years, the United States didn't have public school systems. Now the question is, were those people well educated? And if you read the Federalist Papers, which was newspaper articles written in a newspaper, you read the Federalist Papers and take that and put it in a high school class. And this is farmers reading the Federalist Papers. They had the quote 8th grade education. Well, they read the Federalist Papers and understood them, and I'd say a lot of college students would not really understand the Federalist Papers. So I would say the educational system, which was completely private, no public involvement, was superior, and that the literacy level was much higher in the 1800s than probably is in the 21st century states. Those are some of my just pushback.
Okay, I think let's move to the next question. We did spend a lot of time on college level education, and I'll just note here for everybody to think about later is that the Geneva Institute, one of our original goals for that was actually to have a Christian community college, and we found the path to get to that to be so hard that we haven't been able to do that. So that's another thing that that we could have spent a lot of time talking about, but I want to move on. Second question. We believe that government actions over the last 6 months have seriously and irreparably harmed for many individuals an important freedom. That freedom being the duty for men to work to provide for their families. What can we do to restrain government overreach in this important area and to limit the ability of government to close businesses?
I think we're probably in agreement on this, so I'll let you go first if you want.
Well, part of it is, again, I keep going, I'm going to say this a lot probably, but I think the role of how representative has been lost, and a lot of people have asked me for policy things, and a lot of people have asked, things that really are state level issues. And so I keep going back to that. What's the role of the federal government? What's the role of the job that I'm applying for? The role of the federal government is to ensure rights, to regulate interstate commerce, and to protect our nation. Thankfully, the federal government didn't shut anybody down. That was the states. But when they did that, they did intrude on our rights. And from my point of view, is the federal government has to be watchful of the states to make sure that civil rights aren't infringed on, and the Department of Justice needs to be empowered to do that. Our First Amendment right, free association, the ability, the idea that we can associate, we can do business as we please. And it even extends to something else that has happened during the past few months, is our infringement on our free exercise of religion. When you've got governors shutting down churches, governors telling you can't sing, you can't go to church, that is an absolute infringement, a violation of the First Amendment, because it is our free exercise of religion. That means I get to exercise my faith the way I believe God tells me to. And that applies to going to work, that applies to all of it. So from the federal point of view, we have to have the Department of Justice go to these governors and say, you can't do this, and we're not going to let you do this. That's from that point of view. And absolutely, encouraging it. And the other thing that the government we have done is encourage people to not work by paying them more in unemployment than they made if they're regular job.
We should not do that.
We should not do that. We should not, we should now, when this gets back to protecting rights, we know that there's no, if I get sick, if I get COVID next week, whether I got it from Josh or I got it from you or I got it from the Mexican restaurant I ate, we have no idea where I got it, or Josh can tell you this, he's a doctor. And so we have to, but ultimately we have to say, listen, you can't sue somebody because you say you got COVID from. I think that civil immunity is something that the federal government can do and should be done. And instead of arguing about how many $1 million we're going to give to a museum to close their doors, we need to look at things that actually are affected by this and how we can protect individual rights from this.
Okay. So to add on to what Jay is saying, and like I said, I think we probably think pretty similarly about this, but as your congressman, I will be taking an oath to defend the Constitution, and it's pretty clear to me that no level of government, whether it's the federal government, the state government, the local government, or your HOA, I don't care what level it is, has the constitutional authority to do this, to do what's happened in our country in the last couple of months. And so it is, as a defender of the Constitution, it is incumbent upon me to take a stand against it in the powers that I would have against it. But yeah, there's no authority to shut down the economy and to prevent people from working that I see it. And it should have never happened, and it shouldn't ever happen again. And I will be up there defending that to the day that I die. And there's. Well, I didn't say how long ago. Life's not guaranteed. But so there's even beyond this particular crisis, this particular virus that we have. It's to be taken seriously. I'm not advocating that we don't take it seriously. I don't want my grandmother to get this, but this could be the worst virus or plague that's ever hit humanity ever, and we still don't have the authority to do what we did.
Right.
Now, we have, as leaders, so the beautiful thing about this country, what makes the United States unique in the history of the world is our founding ideals. When the founders made this country, or came up with the Constitution and Federalist Papers and the Declaration, and what they did at that point had never been done. They decided to make government from the consent of the people. That had never been done up until that point. Now, I mean, you had some democracies in Greece, and you had some democracy in Rome, but it was more of an aristocracy than it was a true democracy. What the founders did is they said, the people have these fundamental rights, and from these fundamental rights, the people will allow a form of government to help facilitate day-to-day interactions. But the government isn't here to tell us what to do. The government is here because we let it be here. And so it doesn't matter what crisis is going on. The government doesn't have the authority to do this. If you want people to wear masks, I'll take force on it because that's what they're doing. But if you want people to wear masks, use your bully pulpit, use your leadership skills, convince the people that it's the right thing to do.
Sure.
But you can't force them to do it. It's not constitutional.
Right.
You can try to, and I advocate, listen, if there's something that as a leader you think is the way that we should do things, great, go out and win in the arena of ideas.
Right.
Use your leadership skills, because that's what this country is. It's leaders. It's not, we're not dictators, we're not kings, we're not emperors. We're leaders who are elected, and that's what you do in this country.
And I hate to point Scandinavia again, the Swedish consensus model really worked better than for the authoritarian model that we have here.
And if you are two things. One, if you're a student of history, which I believe everybody here at this table is, we know that government doesn't give back powers that are granted to it. Emergency powers have never worked out for free people. And then other than the other part of history is, and this is something that especially here in Tennessee and places that, Northeast Tennessee, I mean, the United States would not have won the revolution if it weren't for people from East Tennessee. I mean, we saved them. and the idea, the spirit of Americans, of patriotic Americans, is if you ask me and you explain me something why something needs to be done, I'll probably do it. But if you tell me I have to do it, I'm not going to do it just because you told me to.
Right.
It's Scottish.
Yeah. There's that Sons of Liberty DNA that just doesn't go with that.
So, one of the things is I was actually amazed at the ease at which the government shut everything down. And it became apparent to me that the power that they held was the licenses. That the people were willing to stand up, the people were willing to get arrested. They were willing to buck the system, but they were not willing to have their license pulled such that their business was gone. Okay. Yesterday, I ran into a quote from the Minnesota Senator, Dr. Scott Jensen. You may know who he is. And he's the one, he went on Facebook and other places and talked about death certificates and how they were being pressured to fill them out a certain way. And now he's under investigation by the licensor. And I'm going to skip, for time's sake, I'm going to skip a lot of the good part of the quote that he talks about the struggle that medical doctors are going to have if they think they're going to be investigated for doing what they think is the right thing for their patient. But then he went to generalize the issue. This is what he said. What we are seeing is regulatory boards and licensing agencies weaponized in such a way that any of us, whether we hold a medical license or a hairstylist certificate, a teaching license or a nursing license, any of us could be found to be in harm's way simply because someone didn't like the perspective we shared. So it is going to have a chilling effect on the conversations that we share as a country to see licensing boards weaponized by activists as a heralding phenomenon. So, how can we respond to the power that's out there?
So I can say as a physician, I agree with what you're saying. It is a chilling effect, and it's a very real concern that yes. One of the more radical ideas that I think is worth pursuing, I mean, it's something that will take some time to actually make happen in a reality, and some grassroots movement to it, but I wouldn't mind seeing an amendment to the Constitution of the Freedom of Commerce Clause, where people have, as one of their God-given rights, or one of their constitutional rights, I guess, constitutional rights, freedom of commerce, freedom to hang out your shingle and open your business. It's not for the government to tell you that it's okay for you to do that. I think it's an innate right that you have as a person to go out and do that. And I would actually love to see an amendment to the Constitution that states that unequivocally.
Just not to be too assertive, but we have the Ninth Amendment. And, the Ninth Amendment says that just because it's listed in the Constitution doesn't limit the rights we have. And I would argue that the Ninth Amendment covers our right to commerce.
Unfortunately, there's the interstate commerce clause in the Constitution that the federal government uses to,
abuses.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the original intent of it was to make sure that the states didn't stop you from having commerce across state lines. That was
Right.
the original intention of that clause. But the federal government has leveraged that particular clause into interpreting it as, well, we have the authority to regulate everything and anything under the sun.
And so,
And that's why I think having an amendment to make it explicitly clear that it's your right is something that's worth pursuing.
fair enough. I do want to point, that's just under, a strict interpretation of the Constitution that we should have.
I agree with what you're saying.
But yeah, and when I said, a purpose of the federal government is to regulate interstate commerce, I mean it as the founders did, not as what it's done today. But let's keep on going. So legislators across the country, state level and at the federal level, have abdicated their responsibility, and they have given the executives these regulatory powers. And that's why we're in the situation we are, where we have all these regulatory agencies that can license you and, or take your license, whatnot. Now, this is where, and I based on your school analogy, I'm going to guess where we agree on this. I think we need to move away from government licensure. Why can't, why do I have to?
At any level.
Yes. I mean, when I choose my doctor, I don't choose my doctor because he's board licensed. I choose my doctor based on preferences and outcomes. If I want to, my mom's got brain cancer, and she's being treated by a doctor at Vanderbilt, and because she's trying to get the best care she can, and so she's trying to find the best oncologist she can. And it's not because of the government, it's because of, it's more because Vanderbilt has the good name in Middle Tennessee. So if we have, and I'm not sure if bringing this up is the best way to say it, but like a guild system, where private groups of doctors or engineers or merchants come together and say, we have a set of standards that we have agreed on. And if you see our seal here, this means this person has met those standards. And you can choose to use them, or you can choose to use somebody else who doesn't meet this standard. It's up to you, but that's what the free market's about. And so I would move to a privatization of licensures and like I said, would I have someone build a retaining wall that's 12 feet behind my house that doesn't have some sort of engineer stamp? Probably not. But the government doesn't need to tell me that. I can have a group of engineers tell me that, and they say, we haven't had any walls fall in the past 50 years. So that is the way we need to do that, to get away from that and to not let the executive have this authority that really is unconstitutional.
Or the legislative, or the judicial.
I agree with almost everything you're saying. I would add that the violation that the governor is making when he says we're shutting down your business is a violation of the 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal.
I agree.
So if I tell you you can't operate that business, I've just taken charge of your business. I just stole it and said you can't operate.
It's a great point. I never heard anybody make that particular point before. It's a great point.
Especially in the light of the governor not shutting down a business that offers the same services that just happens to be a lot larger.
And they get to pick the winners and the losers, the essentials and the non-essentials.
Yeah. So, and the second thing was when he tells us all to stay at home, he just kidnapped all of us or put us under house arrest. Sort of, that's a violation of house law too. You can't take people and confine them to home and tell them where they can't. So that's another.
I think it's the First Amendment. It's a clear violation. All of these are a clear violation of the First Amendment too. So.
Well, before we move to the next question, since we're in so much group here, do you have recommendations on what we should do? I mean, we've been through this experience and we've lost so much. And how do we get to a position where, when this comes the next time, that we're better prepared to respond?
Well, this is obviously speaking in self-interest, but we've got to elect people who actually believe in the Constitution and believe these things. And we've got to do it across the nation. We can't have people who, you got people that have been doing this for 30 years and nothing's changed. Why are we going to put them to a higher level? We have to be activists. And, if it's electing someone like me that is, that believes in the Constitution and has nothing to lose, I mean, really, what's the worst they can do to me? Send me back home. I'll go, work as an engineer again. I'm okay with that. I'll go turn cranks in a machine shop. But I'm doing it to serve the country. And we've got to do that across this nation. We've got to have a revolution in the way that who we put into office, because if we don't, it's just going to keep going. And we're facing an active communist insurgency in this country. And if we don't have people who will stand up to it, if we have people who are weak and lukewarm to what this country is founded on and what this country is built around, then we're lost.
I echo Jay. Elections matter. Elections matter. Elections matter. You need to find strong leaders who are willing to stand up to this. And I think that's the reason why both Jay and I are running, because we feel compelled in the current world scenario to stand up and not let this happen. So people need to get out and vote, and they need to understand what they're voting for and why it's important. And I don't know how else to do that other than what we've been doing. We're not talking to as many people as we can about the importance of it, but elections matter.
And all politics are local. It's not just your congressman, it's not just your senator, it's not just the governor, it's the county mayor, it's your school board.
It's your HOA.
HOAs are common. I'm not going to get into that. But but it's all levels of government, because you have to ask your county, we've got county mayors here in Tennessee. It's like, well, okay, why did you shut us down? Why do you think you have that authority? You don't. So we're going to kick you out. And we're going to put somebody in here who's going to say, you know what? I respect the rights of this people. And I believe the people are smart enough to do the right thing. That's the other thing. It's this nanny state that says, well, I know what's best for you. Now, I know what's best for me. I know what's best for my family. I know what's best for my mom. When it comes to, we didn't go visit for Easter because of COVID. I didn't want to take a chance of her getting sick. I'd been at work. So we waited. I ended up working from home for 2 weeks. So I was kind of self-quarantined just because of my job. And then I got to go see her. But we weren't going to go take that chance because I believe that was best for her, not because of what the government says.
It's your choice.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question.
And freedom of commerce.
Yeah.
I do think that's.
I like that idea. You hinted at this, so I reordered questions here.
Okay.
Many of us are looking at current events, the lawless insurrection happening in Portland, for example, along with apparent approval from many government officials, and are genuinely concerned that our form of government is falling. Marxism is a real existential threat to our way of life. We sometimes hear politicians say that we held all common beliefs and therefore can unify on some core issues. But when one recognizes the very foundations of our government are based on our Christian worldview, and that Marxism is antithetical to that worldview, it is not at all clear that we hold common core beliefs. Is unity possible in the current cultural setting? If it is, what can we do to work toward it in order to secure the Christian freedoms that our Constitution was designed to protect?
So, is unity possible in a very heterogeneous and diverse country? I don't know the answer to that. I think that I think on many broad issues the country is mostly aligned, and you get enough overlap of enough issues, and you're going to, if you have that Venn diagram, you're going to find that there are areas where most people agree on most things. But I do think that there are probably going to be some things that you're going to find that people don't necessarily agree on. And that's the importance of the Constitution. The Constitution is there to protect your ability to live your life the way that you see fit to live it. But it's been corrupted. It's not that way anymore. The form of the government that we have today is not what the founding fathers envisioned when they wrote the Constitution. And that's why we have that document. It's to let you, I'm a Christian, and I know my faith, but I also have a Muslim friend and they know their faith. It's, you know, in my private life, we can talk about it and I can try to convince them, they can try to convince me. But it's not up to the government to decide who gets to win in that situation. But that's where it's turning to. And, you know, that's probably the extreme example, but in any of these smaller examples, that's where it's turning to. And the Constitution was designed to protect that individuality, that ability to be your own person and to live your own life unobstructed, as long as you're not hurting anybody else. And that's been lost. And so I think the focus of your question is a good focus. But I think the bigger answer is that we need to make sure that the Constitution is preserved so that even when there's not unity, you're still able to live your life regardless of what those around you think.
Okay. So I'm big on making sure terms are defined. So, but if by unity you say that we all have a unified belief and a unified vision for where this country needs to go, no, that's not going to happen. Now, because I mean, well, it's obvious. I mean, we have people who have been indoctrinated to believe in communism, and you know, we have Marxists. Now, the question is, can we come to a point, and I think maybe this is what Josh was trying to say, can we come back to a point where we realize that my right to swing my fist stops at your face? And can we come to a point where we realize the First Amendment does protect unpopular speech. That's why it exists. It's why, you know, you have the right to you have the right to publish the Communist Manifesto if you want. You have the right to go, you know, say we need to change our government. You don't have the right to burn a city. You don't have the right to you know, assault people because they disagree. And so, can we get back to that point? I hope so. If not, this country's lost. You know, but we are to a point where we have, like I said before. I mean, these things aren't spontaneous. I want to be clear. I personally believe that this is being instigated either in part or in whole by state intelligence agencies, foreign intelligence agencies, because this isn't spontaneous. This is meant to divide our country because our enemies know the only way this country will be destroyed is from within, by dividing us against each other, and that's what we're doing, and it's being done. We're being pushed into corners, and we believe that if you disagree with me, you hate me. That's not true. And you know, you may hate me, and maybe that's why you disagree with me. But it's a square and rectangle. You know, some things, yeah, but no, we do have to get back to a place where we can have nuance, where we can have a discussion like this. We can sit down. I've told many people who are associated with like BLM and some of these other movements. It's like, I'll sit down and talk with you. I'm not going to agree with you on everything. We might find some common ground, but let's sit and talk and just open-mindedly talk and say, and you might realize that the people who believe in freedom and believe in this country actually believe in it for everybody. And we want the best for you. And a free market society that's based on these principles is what's best for everybody, even the people who don't believe it.
So good. Adding on to going to the other part of your question, where I think you were going with it. And I hate to sound like a broken record, but political correctness really is a cancer, and it really is. It's being used right now as a tool to shut down debate. And I agree with what you're saying, that the communist, the Marxist, ideal does not fit with the American Constitution. Communism and Marxism is a centralized theology, and I don't say theology, but it's a centralized system, top-down government control. It is not. It is a government. It's a government of dictation. It's not a government from. It's not a consent from the government, and I think that it is antithetical to the to Americanism and to what America is.
So if so, does it need to be defeated?
Well, so it needs to be defeated, yes, but we don't need to lose our Constitution and our American ideals in defeating it. We defeat it by winning in the arena of ideas. We defeat it by having the best argument. We defeat it by shining the light of liberty on it and showing it for what it is. That's how we defeat it. We don't defeat it by changing who we are as a nation, and because then they win. If we also say, well, that speech isn't protected, or that idea is not going to be, we're going to censor that idea. Well, they just won when you do that, because they've managed to get us to change who we are as a country. And so yes, it does need to be defeated, and you defeat it by electing people like us who are willing to stand up to it, and by having discussions like this, and by going out there and talking about it. And so, yeah, it does need to be.
And ultimately, truth wins. God wins in the end.
Yes.
And we have to fight. We have to fight hard, but we have to fight with truth.
Sure.
And with because God gave us free will. I believe in free will, and so we can't do that. We can't take away other people's freedom to disagree and to be wrong. And teaching history. This is an ideology that killed 100 million people in the last century.
Yeah.
And watch. All you have to do is sit somebody down and tell them to watch the killing. I watched it a few months ago, and when you've got he's there in the camp and he's writing, and he says they speak to us in French and English, and anybody who responds who is educated enough to know French or English gets killed. They say it's a mental disorder to remember what it was like before the revolution. We have to protect the comrade children, because they're untainted by the past. They know nothing but the state. Anka is what the Cambodian state, and they said God is dead. Anka will provide for you now. And we have to teach them history and say, listen, this is what you're getting into. And the sad part is that a lot of the people who are out there really pushing these ideas are the first ones that will get killed in the end when it turns on.
Right.
But and to go on with what Jay's saying, which I think is an important point. Freedom's not free, and every generation is going to fight their fight for freedom. It's been that way since the inception of the country, and I don't see that ever stopping. And so we're going to win this time because we're going to win. I'm not going to let us not. Jay's not going to let us not. But it's not just our fight. It's our children's fight. It's our grandchildren's fight. It's our great-grandchildren's fight. It's something that, and that's why you need to remember that history. And that's why these founding ideals need to be held so tightly and embraced so tightly, so that the future generations know that, hey, look, when I was growing up, and I'm sure Jay's the same way, I thought we defeated communism with Reagan in the 80s. When the Berlin Wall fell, I thought it was done. I thought communism was over.
I think we get back to education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The university professors, the only communists left on the planet.
Yeah. And that's the thing, because Josh is 4 years older than me. I was 5 years old when the Berlin Wall fell. And now the Berlin Wall's been down longer than it was up. But my generation is the last generation. Not 8. I was 8. I'm sorry. I was thinking 86, but it was 89. I said my wife. She actually went and took a piece off. She was in Germany at the time, and I've got a piece of the fence that divided East and West Germany sitting in my car right now. But for me, for my generation, we're the last ones that it's a real memory, a real physical memory. I remember. Now that was this year a little older, you see. But I remember the most vivid early political memory that I have was watching the tanks outside the Russian White House in '91 when the Soviet Union fell. Finally fell and they had the coup. But but anybody younger than me has no real memory. It's in a book, if it's even taught.
Probably not.
But it's only in a book for them. It's not real. It's not history. When I lived in Florida for a little time, and there was some lady who had come over. She had family from the Soviet Union, came over, and she went into Publix and cried because of all the food. Because there was food. She couldn't believe it. And so it takes people with a real memory of it to really understand. And if we don't teach them, it's that history is lost, and it goes on, and people then they are forced to relive that horror, or put themselves through it. Right?
They need to read the Gulag Archipelago.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's long, but you can get the abridged version.
Oh, how we burn!
We never read that interesting.
Well,
what do you want to add, Steve?
Just something real quickly. One thing about you said, what about the unity? Unity is not necessarily the be all and end all. And that sometimes we think all unity is good, but I think that's not true. There's a kind of unity we don't want. And the amazing thing about our Constitution is it provides for a lot of diversity. With a republic, the problem is we've become very centralized and powers become focused in the federal government. Lots of power there. And the 10th Amendment for you gentlemen should be your memorized mantra that you shout. If you go to the House, shout. Where in the Constitution are we given authority to do this?
Yeah.
Because the power is not delegated to the federal government by the Constitution, are reserved to the states and to the people.
And I think the important part is to the people.
Right.
It's delegated to. I think that gets lost because I think governors look at that and say, well, then that's my power. It's not.
No.
It's the people's power.
And one way I think we could become more unified, quit fighting, is that the left and the right quit trying to take each other over, so to speak. But say, Tennessee is going to have a lot of liberty. And if you want to live in that kind of world where there's a free market, where there is all these freedoms and there are people thinking like Christians and they love the Lord, that's the dominant worldview of that place, go there. You want to live in San Francisco or California or New York City, go there. See
When we
how
have
you
freedom to do it, that's good. We see that with Elon Musk now. Living in California and going to Texas.
You want to have low taxes? If you want to go somewhere where the state baby is going to take care of you in college, we'll go to California and see how they're doing.
Just don't leave California because the taxes are so high, and then come to Tennessee and try and
do the same thing all over.
don't realize the problem.
So that 10th Amendment is critical. returning that power. And I think we can have a unity as a country that would actually be improved if we allow for diversity among the states and give them all, the people
Very
in
good.
the states.
Okay, next question, and this is another question of unity on an issue that I think we probably need to come to an agreement on. One of the issues that we face in our culture is lack of unity on what provides the basis for law. At some level, we can point to the U.S. Constitution, but increasingly there's a lack of respect for the protections that it contains, and some are even openly calling for its replacement. Additionally, the Constitution itself recognizes its limitation in its provision for an amendment process. We as Christians recognize the ultimate foundation for law is God's eternal law, and that law not only provided the basis for the writing of the Constitution, but also provides a basis for its amendment process. Given it has become common to dismiss the ultimate basis for law on grounds of a pluralistic culture, how do we approach law from the Christian worldview in our culture today?
So it is an interesting question. It's one that's delicate because of the First Amendment, and we've talked about the idea of pluralistic. But we do have to acknowledge that there is an ultimate truth, that we cannot be relativists, that we have to say, and I would rather all of us come together and say, yeah, the Bible is the source of our laws and it's the source of truth. We know that there aren't going to be people who accept that, but we can look at our founding documents that say, whether I don't think it was by a politically correct design. I think it was just the nature of the language that Thomas Jefferson wrote, that we are endowed by our Creator. And I've told many people, I've talked to people who are atheists, and I said, listen, if you don't want to say it comes from God, say it is natural, say it comes from the fact that you're a human, and we are all created. I believe God created us, and I believe that creation, that life is what gives me rights as a human. It doesn't come from the Constitution. So we have to acknowledge that. I think it comes to education, because people don't understand the concept of rights. I hear a lot of times people say, well, is your constitutional right? No, it's your human right that the Constitution enshrines. And if you talk about people wanting to change the Constitution, they can try. But when we recognize that ultimately our rights do come from God, that some things you can't amend. You look at the Bill of Rights. You can't repeal anything in the Bill of Rights, because those are things that are just enshrined by the Constitution. They're not something that is given to us by the Constitution, so the Constitution can't take it away either. It's I don't know. That's what I got.
They're from God.
Yeah.
The rights are from God.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So this is a highly nuanced question, and it's one that so my bachelor's degree is in philosophy and religion. So I'm a professional philosopher. And where do rights come from? And I mean, that's a question that has been debated hotly for thousands of years by minds much smarter than mine. And the ultimate answers haven't always been clear to everybody. But I will take a practical look at this. The Constitution is clear in how it's set up, and we go back to the founding of this country with the founding fathers and their ideals at the time, that they were designing a document whereby a people were giving their consent to the government to be governed. It had never been done before. And so I think from a very practical standpoint, that goal has been largely very well done. I mean, the document the original made was very well done. Now, the government today, I think they would find unrecognizable It's not, it's grown into a place that they would have never thought that it could go. And that's up to people like us to make sure that gets pulled back. I would say let's go to the religious side of it, because I do think that our rights ultimately come from our Creator, from God, and like Jay said, from being human. There's natural rights; they're there, and we can get into a philosophical debate about that. We won't get a good answer. I mean, we won't get a clear answer. We'll talk all day, but we won't get a clear answer. But I do think myself that that's where they come from. You know, and I'm not a scripturist. I'll never try to beat somebody in a quote war from the Bible, because I'm not able to do that. But I do know that Jesus was challenged with this question at one point, when they were trying to trap him, into getting basically being thrown into jail for saying that you don't have to pay taxes. This is what the trap was. And he said something very important at that point. He said, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's." Or thereabouts. I think it's important to remember right here in this particular context. We can set up as human beings, as the people of this country, a document and a system under which we commonly agree to live with these foundational, or with these ideals of these innate rights that we have just by being human beings, or by being human. And we can then lead our religious lives and pay our respects to God in our religious life, in our own life, separate from that. And I think it's important to keep those things, it's important to live both of those. And I think that's where your answer lies, is in that path. And walking that path that's a daily challenge for everybody, but walking that path is a hard one. Picking good leaders to lead your country is part and parcel of walking that path.
And I've said it before, we're dual citizens. We're citizens of this country, but we're also citizens of the kingdom of God. And how we live one affects the other. I cannot, because I'm a citizen of the kingdom of God, I can't act against his laws. And that includes when I am representing the government of the United States. I can't go against those values. And thankfully, our Constitution protects those values. And I shouldn't have to make a choice between the two.
So like on abortion, you would say, I can't support that because God's law forbids it. It's
Right.
Killing an innocent baby.
Yes, because life begins at conception. And I've looked. Tennessee recently passed a heartbeat bill, and a lot of people say, "Well, that's a great step in the right direction." This was an article I read, so I'm not. This isn't 100% my own. I'm plagiarizing a little bit, but the idea of, well, that's a step in the right direction, while ignoring the fact that you don't say it begins at life begins at a heartbeat. You say it begins at conception, and that's it. Because when you say it begins at a heartbeat, you give a big loophole for the people who want to kill that baby. Because we know that there is a range of time between 6 and 8 weeks when a heartbeat might be detected. So the person running the ultrasound, the doctor that's there, saying, "Oh, I don't hear anything," whether they did or not. And so we're not protecting life from conception. So yeah, that's the stance that we have to have. And I think we've got too many people who are afraid to stand up and say that, and they're lukewarm on the topic.
So if you have a baby that you want to get rid of, it's baby.
Right.
Sort of.
Yeah.
And it's tautology.
And well, that is kind of the issue here, right?
Yeah.
Just because is that the question becomes, is that baby? And they are, right?
Yes.
Because it's made in the image of God. But many of our culture have rejected that idea. And I think it's because they have rejected that idea that they've been able to find this thing in the penumbra of the Constitution that guarantees the woman's right to abortion, right?
I don't, the Constitution doesn't guarantee the right to an abortion. I don't
Exactly.
see anywhere that's actually.
Right, and they admitted it in the argument. They said it wasn't there, but they said that it's not in the Constitution, but it's in the penumbra. It's kind of floating above it somewhere.
And so, and which brings me to something that's very important to me, is the concept of activist judges. Because while we know that there are judges who do have an agenda and they use their rulings to make an agenda, anytime you hear a legislator or an executive say, well, there was an activist judge as an excuse to why something happens, that legislator and that executive are either complicit or lazy. Because in 78 Federalists, we're told, it's explained that the judiciary is the least dangerous branch because they have neither the sword nor the purse. So the executive has the authority and the ability to say, as Andrew Jackson famously did, Justice Marshall's made his decision, now let him enforce it. And because of this great system that we've got, if the executive says that and the legislature agrees that it was a bad ruling, then they don't have to do anything. Ultimately, they should pass a law, or they should pass legislation that closes whatever explanation the judiciary used. But if the legislature feels that the executive is acting outside of his power, or that the judiciary made a correct ruling, they can impeach him. So when it's a term that really sends my spidey senses going whenever I hear a legislator or an executive say, well, it was an active judge, because that means they're, like I said, they're complicit or they're lazy.
So to add on to what Jay said, and this is a very important point that Jay mentioned here, the founders set up the three branches to be equal checks and balances. And you have your legislative, your executive, and your judicial. And before anything happens to an American citizen, all three branches need to agree. If one branch disagrees, then it's not a law. It's not something that can happen. At least that's how they set it up. That's how it was intended. Something has happened that the judicial branch has obtained this unassailable authority that is just ridiculous, and it's not constitutional. But I see very few options in today's world to challenge it. My interpretation of history of the Constitution and of how the country was set up was that, as Jay's saying, you have the power of the purse and the power of the sword. The legislator can make a law, but if the executive doesn't agree with the law, then the executive doesn't enforce the law. And if both the legislator and the executive agree with the law, but the judicial branch says it's not constitutional, well, then it's not constitutional. You have to have all three steps for that to happen. Somehow it's turned into today that if the Supreme Court says that it's law, it's now law, and if the executive branch doesn't enforce it, they get impeached. And if the legislative branch tries to rewrite some law around it, then that's also called unconstitutional. I don't know where this authority has come from, because it wasn't there in history, but it's there today, and we need to do something about it. I do think
it's Congress's responsibility to do something about it, because ultimately it is their responsibility.
Well, I think it's both Congress's and the executive. I mean, it's both branches' responsibility to do something about it, because that's the check and balance. And so, it's the Congress's and it's.
Yeah, I would disagree that unanimity is required. I think that's why we've got an odd number of branches. But ultimately, yes. What does Congress need to do? Like right now, for example, all Congress would have to do is it could be a one-page docket bill, and don't get me started on 1,800-page bills that you have 30 minutes to vote on. But it could be a one-page bill, and that says, whatever U.S. Code, the 1964 Civil Rights Act is not to be construed as to mean sexual orientation or transgenderism is a protected class. And literally, you could write a bill that's one page long that would overturn the Supreme Court's most recent ruling.
Yeah.
This is friendly, it's not. I do think that you need unanimity to get something across. I do think each branch has an equal chance to object to a rule or law or any action that's taken from the government onto the American citizen. And so I'm trying to figure out where you see the loophole.
Well, it's not, I wouldn't call it a loophole, I call it judicial review. You know, the judiciary, and my constitutional law professor would really be mad at me right now because I can't think of the exact case, but it's one of the early cases, one of the Marshall cases, is that the judiciary doesn't have a right to rule on anything unless it is brought to them.
Yeah.
So you could have a law passed, have the executive sign it, the judiciary is not involved at all.
But that law, if the citizen thinks that it's unconstitutional, will then challenge it.
If they have standing.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean,
everybody
should have that standing.
Or if the law doesn't affect you, then you don't have standing. I mean, that's
So that's an interesting thing. We're going back up a little bit to talk about. I think you're right that the Congress could resolve a particular issue in this way. But the process seems to be corrupted. Right. We didn't write a law that gave these provisions.
right.
Right. And now we have to somehow get the majority of Congress to overturn a judicial. That seems backwards to me. It seems like the Congress needs to do something. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's judges, I'm not sure. The Congress needs to do something to rein in this authority the court has assumed that they really don't have.
Right. Well, and
I would just sort of, that's why it's helpful is Rand Paul, I think it's Rand Paul, every so often introduces a bill to limit the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court's jurisdiction can be limited by the legislative branch, my understanding is correct. And so you all, who were there, you can go and say, we'd like to pass a bill that the Supreme Court has absolutely no authority over an issue of abortion. That is outside their jurisdiction, that's the state issue. And you could actually limit the jurisdiction. Do y'all know anything about that, or if that's possible, or how that works? That's what I've been told.
well, there was something like that was brought up in one of the many candidate surveys that I filled out as one of the pro-life alliance surveys, and they asked if you would support legislation to limit the Supreme Court's jurisdiction on abortion. The problem I have is that if we are going to, the theory on that is that we're leaving it up to the states. Well, I think that the Constitution does, I mean, if we believe it's life and we believe that human lives have a fundamental right, then it is a federal issue. We can't say that one state, it's okay for one state to condone murder and another state to not. Because then we get into the whole thing of, well, I'll just go to another state to have an abortion. So on that particular issue, I think it requires federal legislation, if not a constitutional amendment. And the Supreme Court, we'd have to rewrite the Constitution to take that away from the Supreme Court if it's federal law. That's the problem I have with that.
With limiting jurisdiction?
Yeah, on especially if it's something
that's
that
all
we
the problem,
yeah.
that's what you're saying.
Yeah,
Especially
especially
will do it. But
yeah.
it does take it out of the Supreme Court can't veto a state law. Or basically, which is what happened. Roe v. Wade was there was this law, it was in Alabama, is that what it was? It made abortion against the law, I don't know where it was. But then it goes to the Supreme Court. They were telling the Supreme Court, you can't rule on that. So that means the state law stays against abortion.
right.
And that's an improvement.
But like I said, I think it has to be a federal issue. Ultimately, especially if we're talking about abortion.
So what power does the state have? I mean, in the cultural climate we have now, where abortion is legal, do you think the state has the power to say that's enough? We're not going to allow that in the state of Tennessee.
Absolutely.
How do we do that?
And then let's say they do it. Say Tennessee outlaws abortion and starts prosecuting abortionists, put them in jail, or maybe more. It's murder, so we treat them like murderers and we execute them. I don't know. Say it goes that far in Tennessee.
You're not running for office, are you?
So if would you support the federal government punishing that state for that law? Or would you say, no, they have the right to do that as they want?
In this particular issue, obviously I would support the state because of my belief that they're protecting life. Now, if it was a different issue, it would depend. It would really depend on what the state's doing. If the state is violating a right, because I have an issue. I agree with the idea of incorporation. I agree that because if we're going to say that our rights that are enshrined by the Constitution do come from God, then we can't say that a state can violate them. The federal government can't violate them, but the state can. So if, in this particular instance, yes, the state is acting, I believe, constitutionally and acting not infringing on anyone's rights. In another instance, if they were infringing on someone's rights, then they would need to be held accountable.
But the Supreme Court believes that we would be infringing on people's rights.
Well, that's a good thing I'm not of justice. That's the thing. I'm running to be part of the legislature.
We at Tennessee you're affirming that we have a power to stand up.
Yes.
What do you say to that?
So I firmly support the pro-life agenda at all levels. I think any win that we can get is an important win because it's such an important issue. And I will be an advocate for that at every level that I can be an advocate for. I do think though that there is my fundamental ideology from a governing standpoint is I believe in minimalism for government at all levels, at the federal level, the local level, the state level, at all levels. I think the government interferes in people's lives way too much. And so in this particular issue, I think that the life of the baby has its constitutional protections, and we need to follow the Constitution on those constitutional protections. And I'll totally support that. But you got to be careful of that power because that sword can be used against you down the road for other issues. And so we need to make sure that we're following the constitutionality of it, and we're mindful that government's great when it's on your side. It's really bad when it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to make sure that we don't give ammo to a potential enemy down the road.
There's a great analogy that Ben Shapiro uses. It says we've got two parties. You've got Republicans and Democrats that are fighting over the gun of government. My plan is to, and I think this is what Josh was saying, the idea is that gun's a 22, not a 45. Because somebody's going to, the control of it's going to, the control of it's going to go back and forth. So we have to make sure that it's as least powerful as possible.
Do you believe that same thing against the citizen healing at 22 or 40?
Oh, no.
Any restrictions on?
So the Second Amendment.
I won't buy a tank. Are you okay with that?
I'm totally okay.
You know what? Not only am I okay with it,
I probably carpool.
not only am I okay with it, but I know enough about federal gun laws to say you can buy a tank right now, and I know the onerous paperwork that you have to go through that we need to eliminate.
I think
He tried to buy one.
Yeah, the Second Amendment is about having parity with the government. The limit to what guns you buy or weaponry you buy should be your wallet and probably your wife.
Well, and to go on, in Jay's, I'm sure we've heard you say this before, but shall not be infringed. Nowhere else in the Constitution, in the Declaration, in any of the federal, nowhere else in any of the founding documents do you see shall not be infringed, other than with the Second Amendment. It's that important to the founders that you have that right. And so I see no, I'm from an academic level, from a theoretical level, it shouldn't even be a debate. We shouldn't need to. We shouldn't even need to have a debate of what kind of gun law, what kind of concealed carry law we're going to allow. It's already allowed. It's right there in the dang Constitution. I got my permit right here. It's called the U.S. Constitution. I mean, there's a practical thing, that we're going to have to. I mean, there's theory and then there's reality. We're going to have to fight it as best as we can because these idiots are usurping our rights. But yeah, it shall not be infringed at any level.
Well, we have gone about the time that I had decided to go. If you want it, if you're gung ho, I want to take one more question, we'll do it.
It's fine by me. I talk about this stuff all day long. I love it.
All right, let's do one more question and then we'll wrap it up. So fiscal irresponsibility.
Well, not that question.
Fiscal irresponsibility has reached almost epic proportions in our federal government. Fiscal. Yeah, what did I say? I meant to say fiscal, whatever I said. Seriously compromising our financial security and hard-earned wealth. The need for a balanced budget is fit. But how do we accomplish it given that an increasing majority of U.S. citizens are dependent on government welfare of some sort? How do we pay back the massive debt that we have assumed? Is an economic crash inevitable, or can something be done to preemptively address the problem before such a crash?
So I don't think anything's inevitable. Nothing's inevitable. Right? Every option's available. The amount of debt. I'd go back to what I just said. I'm a minimalist when it comes to government, and government clearly has outgrown any sort of reasonable size and reach and scope that it was ever intended for in this country. And how we ever pay back this $26 trillion, I think, is the current. That is going to be a challenge to do of epic proportions, and it's going to take real adults up there who are willing to make hard, difficult decisions. When Jay and I, and you guys, when you're at home and you're facing a deficit in your home budget, you don't get to just print more money. You have to make the hard decision. Well, do we trade in this car for something that's slightly not as good or slightly cheaper? Do we, instead of going out to eat, do we eat some ramen? I mean, you make those hard decisions because you're an adult and you're responsible, and that's what you do. When we get up there, whether it's Jay or myself or somebody else, that is our job, is to make those tough decisions. And they're not always going to be pretty, they're not always going to be popular, but that's your job. It's not to print more money, it's not to say yes. It's basically to say no.
Turbulence may not be necessary if you take this kind of action.
Well, I've already agreed to turbulence anyway, so but yeah, you need to be responsible. I mean, it's your onus as the elected representative of any district, this one in particular, to make those hard decisions. That's why you're being put up there. And you pay off. Just ask Dave Ramsey. You pay off the debt $1 at a time. We have $26 trillion. It's a lot of dollars. It's going to take some time to pay it off, but you pay it off by starting to make some responsible decisions, and you start socking money away, and 10 generations from now, we might be able to have it paid off. I'm being facetious, I think.
I mean, somebody asked me this morning about a similar question. The reality is, we know that the borrower is slave to the lender. And if you look at who we owe money to, it's not somebody we want to be a slave to. So, is it inevitable? I like to think it's not. I do disagree with Josh. One thing's inevitable: Jesus is coming back. But yeah, and whether or not now he may come back before we pay off that $26 trillion.
I'll concede that.
Yeah, but whether it's inevitable or not, we've got to. We should be the captain that's trying to seal off the hatches and get the bilge pumps going, not the band that's playing on the deck. And that's, we have to say, okay, we're going to do the best we can to get back to the track. And if we can't save it, at least I died trying. Because we've got a lot of fiscal issues. I mean, It's
Is anything off the table? Is any one thing more important than getting the budget in order?
Well, I think our innate rights are more important.
Yeah.
I mean, I think maintaining.
I mean, as far as our spending.
Yeah, I mean.
no, I think maybe your question is there a sacred cow in the budget that we need to knock
Exactly.
out?
Oh,
No, there is not one piece of our federal budget that can't be cut. And I'm not a John McCain hawk, but I believe in strong national defense. And I served in the Army, and I want a strong national defense. But even our defense budget has a lot of bloat in it. And the reality is, I think we need to, and this is something that can be done on the legislative level, and it's also part of the executive, but I think we need to look at how our general officers transition from, into the private sector. They make a lot of money setting up contracts that they don't have to pay for because they're getting out because they're retired. And I think we need to look at that. We need to look at what we really need. Help our troops, help the actual, get the hardware we actually need, not buy tanks that the Army says we don't need to buy. But no, there's nothing off the table to be cut, because like Josh said, when you're worried about keeping the lights on, you don't go eat steak. And if you're worried about getting food on the table, if you're worried about keeping the lights on, you don't do those things. In fact, sometimes you have a yard sale.
Sure.
And we've got
Sell
sell some like tanks.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, this is it's kind of a joke, but it's kind of serious. People have talked about the militarization of the police force and how we've got these programs to give military surplus equipment to law enforcement agencies. I really don't have a problem with that, but what I do think we should do is, for every piece of military hardware we give to a law enforcement agency, we put up for public auction. We put a piece up for public auction, because I should be able to buy it if the police have it.
And just to, I'm an eternal optimist. I do think that there's a light at the end of this tunnel. It's going to take tough decisions. It's going to take people who've got who are adult enough to make these hard decisions. And there's a lot of vote in the government. Just the size alone, it's way bigger than it needs to be. It's way bigger than it was ever intended to be. And I can show you one specific area, but it extrapolates across the whole government as a whole. And it's these unelected bureaucrats and the size. But in medicine, every physician in medicine is responsible for, or supports, not responsible for, but supports approximately 17 jobs. Is the ratio of physicians to jobs. And part of that explains why medicine is so expensive, because the human brain is the most expensive part of just about anything that you do. And it's great for a jobs program, it's like, hey, great, we'll get 17 jobs. The problem is 10 of those 17 jobs are administrative. 7 are people laying hands on patients. And that's just, if I had curse words right now, that's what it would be. It's just not appropriate.
Yeah.
You should never have more administrators than you have people on the front lines. And most of that's regulation. Most of that's, so right now, well, at last count, my newest information is like a decade old because they're hiding. But at last count, Medicare's rules that providers have to follow are 130,000 pages long. Let's say that again, 130,000 pages long. And as a provider, you have to abide by those rules, or it's not Medicare mistake, it's not a Medicare accident. It's called Medicare fraud, and they throw you in jail. And so that's why you've got 10 administrators and 7 people laying hands on patients. And Medicare is it's a big agency. It makes I can't remember, it's the 3rd or 4th largest of the bureaucracies that are up there, and it's like $800 or $900 billion is the size of Medicare. And so imagine if we could just turn one of those jobs, and we should be able to turn a lot more of these jobs. Just say we go from 10 administrators to 9, and we cut down just one administrator out there by pulling back the regulation pulling back red tape. That's about a 5 to 6% savings. You multiply that across all that we spend on medicine, and just on the government side alone, let alone the private sector side, and the savings are tremendous. And you can start packing that away to the death. And so I think you start looking at each of these programs. This is, obviously as a physician, I'm a little bit more aware of this, but I'm sure this extrapolates across all of government. I'm sure that it's not just Medicare, that this is an issue. And I would consider it a huge failure on my part if I only cut down one of those administrative jobs. I don't think that you should have more frontline workers than you have administrators in the system.
Yes.
And so I think there's opportunities to do this, but you have to be smart about it, and you have to be willing to make those hard decisions. And you have to be willing to stand up, because just look at, think what you will about President Trump, but I've never seen anybody stand up to the swamp like he has, and look at the pushback he gets on a daily basis. He's getting hit from every side, and it's because he's actually stood up and done these things. We need more people like that are willing to stand up and make these decisions and make these cuts. And so I think that's how we get there. I am optimistic that we can.
And actually passing a budget is another thing. We're living on continuing resolutions, and they consider a budget cut not increasing but we haven't. I think it's been 20 years since we passed. The government has actually passed the budget.
Stephen, last word.
Well,
I could have said it better myself.
I'm thankful for y'all. I appreciate y'all coming up, giving us some things to think about. One thing with the budgeting, small government, we got to get rid of almost everything the federal government's doing. Education, healthcare, and I wish we'd been able to get that more. But I'm going to just say healthcare is absolutely no business in the federal government at all. They should have nothing. There should be no Department of Health, Education, or Welfare. Right. That's the role of the family. We're supposed to take care of our health, education, and the welfare of those who are not. I would say that would cut a lot of money. Get rid of health, education, and welfare, and the budget would be drastically reduced. So you don't want to do that. Here I am sending.
We're going to wrap up. I want to thank both of you for being here. It's wonderful that you came. I want to thank everyone that listens to what we have to say today. And also ask all of our viewers to consider that these are the two candidates that thought it worthwhile to come down and talk to us and dig in deep about issues that affect Christian culture and the way that we live. So consider these two guys as their hosts. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was very good. That was fun.
Like I said, I like talking about this stuff.
Unfortunately, we just got to, like, you can't stop talking about it.